Before history was recorded in ink, it was etched into the earth by the march of armies, and few armies have echoed through the corridors of time quite like the Myrmidons. They were the shock troops of the Trojan War, the unbreakable wall of bronze that stood behind Achilles, the very instrument of divine wrath. But to understand them, we must look past the clash of spears and the burning of Troy, back to a time when the line between the insect and the human, the earth and the flesh, was not so clearly drawn. Their story is not just one of war, but of metamorphosis, of a curse whispered by the gods, and of a king who had to rebuild his people from the very dust of the ground. We must travel to the Island of Aegina, a sun-bleached stone in the turquoise waters of the Saronic Gulf. This is ancient Greece, a world where the gods do not watch from afar. They walk among men, they love, they envy, and they destroy with the casual cruelty of a child knocking over a tower of blocks. The cosmos here is a web of divine ego, and mortals are merely the threads they pull. It is a world of bloodlines and curses, where a king's virtue is measured by his ability to survive the whims of Olympus. In this age, there reigned a king named Aeacus. He was a man of such piety and justice that he was often called upon to settle disputes not among men, but among the gods themselves. He was the son of Zeus and the nymph Aegina, and he ruled over a prosperous and diligent people. But his favor with the father of the gods drew the jealous eye of a far darker power. Hera, the queen of the heavens, looked upon Aeacus with hatred. In her fury, she sent a plagia, a pestilence so foul and devastating that it defied description. It did not strike the weak or the old. It struck the very lifeblood of the island. Slowly, horribly, the people of Aegina began to die. The fields went silent. The marketplace emptied. The scent of pine was replaced by the stench of decay. King Aeacus watched in horror as his kingdom turned into a necropolis, his subjects falling around him like wheat before a scythe, until he stood alone, the grieving shepherd of a graveyard. Desperate, surrounded by the silence of the dead, Aeacus did what any mortal man would do in the face of such divine abandonment. He prayed. He fell to his knees before the great altar of his father, Zeus, and cried out to the sky. But the answer he received was not a voice, nor a vision of light. It was a sound, a rhythmic, rustling, chittering sound. He looked up from his prayers to see a solitary oak tree, sacred to Zeus, towering over him. Its bark was alive. From the trunk of that great tree, a column of ants was descending. They marched in an endless black ribbon, a river of mandibles and legs, flowing down the bark and spilling onto the sacred earth below. Zeus had heard him. The king of gods does not give back what is taken. He replaces it with something stranger. A voice seemed to ride on the wind, or perhaps it was the sudden clarity of revelation within the king's mind. Do not mourn the dead, my son. Take these creatures. Make them your people. Aeacus obeyed. That night, under the light of a moon that looked as pale as bone, the king fell into a deep, exhausted slumber. He dreamed of the ants. He dreamed of their industrious nature, their tireless strength, their unthinking loyalty to the colony. And as the sun rose over the island, painting the sky in hues of blood and gold, Aeacus awoke. He looked out over his desolate city, the empty homes and the silent streets. But the silence was broken. It was not the rustle of leaves, but the shuffle of feet, the clink of bronze, the murmur of voices. Where there had been emptiness, there was now a multitude. The ants were gone. In their place stood mean, strong, hardy, dark-haired men who looked at the world with eyes of fierce determination. They called themselves the Myrmidons, from the Greek word myrmex, meaning ant. They were the children of the oak and the earth, born not of woman, but of divine intervention. They carried with them the nature of the creatures they had been. They did not know fear. They did not question orders. They possessed a work ethic that bordered on the fanatical and an endurance that no mortal-born race could match. From that day forward, the Myrmidons were the fiercest warriors in Greece. But their story was not destined to end on the quiet island of Aegina. The blood of Zeus ran thick in the line of Aeacus, and fate has a way of snatching men from their homes to die on foreign shores. Generations passed, and the Myrmidons became the guard, the army, and the family of a young prince named Achilles. You know the name. You know the rage. When the call went out for the great expedition against Troy, it was the Myrmidons who formed the elite core of the Greek forces. They were not the shouting, brawling mobs of the other kings. They were a machine of war. Under the command of Achilles, they were an extension of his will. When Achilles sulked in his tent, refusing to fight because of a bruised ego, the Myrmidons fell silent, a crouched predator waiting to strike. And when he returned, when the roar of Achilles is come thundered across the plain of Troy, it was the Myrmidons who drove the spears into the soft throats of the enemy. Homer paints them not as individuals, but as a singular force. In the Iliad, they're the ones who build the wall, they're the ones who man the ships, they're the ones who pour from the Myrmidon ships like a swarm of wasps when the Trojans threaten the Greek lines. There's a terrifying unity to them. They do not break rank. They do not flee. They fight with the relentless, mindless ferocity of the hill from which they were born. But the myth of the Myrmidons is more than just a war story. It is a story about the relationship between the ruler and the ruled, and the terrifying efficiency of the hive mind. To the ancient Greeks, the Myrmidons represented the ideal soldiera, the one who does not ask why, but does and dies. They embodied the fear and awe of the military state, where the individual is subsumed by the collective. In their origin story, we see the ultimate expression of autocracy, a king whose people are literally created for him, molded from insects to serve a singular purpose. It is a legend that speaks to the dehumanizing nature of war. The Myrmidons are the ultimate other, a brave, yes, but perhaps a little too inhuman. In later centuries, the word Myrmidon would lose its mythic grandeur and decay into a slur for mindless, hired thugs or policemen who blindly obey corrupt orders. But in the time of the heroes, they were respected. They were the necessary hammer of the gods. And yet, there is a tragedy to them. Because they were born of ants, they had no mothers, no childhoods, no pasts other than the dirt and the tree. Their entire existence was defined by service to the house of Aeacus and, ultimately, to Achilles. When Achilles fell, shot through the heel by the coward's arrow of Paris, the heart went out of the Myrmidons. They had been born for the hero. Without him, they were merely ants again, scurrying aimlessly on the ash of history. The legacy of the Myrmidons persists not just in the pages of Homer, but in the very way we imagine armies. They are the archetype of the elite unit, the special forces who exist on a plane of lethality above the common soldier. They remind us that in the ancient world, the line between nature and civilization was porous. The city was a fragile thing, built upon a wild, untamable earth. The gods could turn nature into civilization with.